Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the living room. I'm Jason Silverman, the Cinematech Director for the CCA. And we're really grateful to have you all here today. That was music by Ali Farka Toure. Thanks, Amra, for choosing that. We have a really special program tonight. I'm so thrilled to be partnering with National Organization for Women and Defenders of Wildlife, and to be celebrating the incredible achievements of Allison Reed, the director of The Woman Who Loved Giraffes, and Anne Dag, who's celebrated here. We want to let you know that the living room is an ongoing program of the CCA. You'll be getting emails. Check the CCA website at ccasantafe.org to figure out what we have upcoming. The schedule's moving quickly, and it's getting more and more exciting and busy. Next Tuesday, we've got a celebration of strange silent films with one of the great silent film composers, Ken Winokur, in conversation with Kirk Ellis. Lots of other great stuff coming up. So I want to introduce our partners to start. First, the president of the Santa Fe chapter of National Organization for Women, Janet Williams, who will tell you a little bit about what they're doing during the quarantine.
Hi. Well, we've been meeting via Zoom, like everyone else in the world, and we've been trying to allocate the funds that we have to the greatest need in our community. And so we've been giving to La Familia, Solace, Food Depot, I can't remember all the others, RCRC in Albuquerque, the Reproductive Choice Group. And so we've just been trying to help out our community. And we're happy to help with the films at CCA. We've been doing this film series with Jason and CCA for a while now, and we're excited that we could do this via Zoom. This is a new world, and we're joining in. So thank you so much, and it's so exciting to see Dr. Dag here, and also the director. So this is going to be an exciting evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet, and thanks for being our CCA's partner for this last few years has been wonderful to work with you. Next, we've got Michael Dax, who's the Southwest Coordinator for Defenders of Wildlife. They're doing essential work throughout the world to doing the kind of work that Dr. Dag helped launch all these years ago. Michael.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Michael Dax with Defenders of Wildlife here in Santa Fe. We're a national organization, but our Southwest headquarters are here in Santa Fe. Mostly we focus on North America, but we do have an international program. And actually earlier this year, Michelle Lujan Grisham, our governor, signed into law SB 75, the Wildlife Trafficking Act. So New Mexico now has its own wildlife trafficking law to complement federal and international law. And that was a 4-year effort. And we joined a number of other states. But what's most exciting about New Mexico's law is instead of using a static list of species, it uses the CITES Appendix 1 list, so Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Last year, giraffes were upgraded to Appendix 2, which unfortunately means that there's still some trade allowed. Fortunately, that means that their population is not as dire as other species like rhinoceros or elephants or things like that. But the good news is, if at some point giraffe populations really decline, New Mexico would have a law that would help play a small part in deterring any sort of trafficking that's going on. So fantastic film. Glad all of you could be here tonight, and thanks so much for the CCA for putting on this event and events like it. They're really such an asset to our community.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for all you do. We're really grateful to have you doing the work that you do. Our host tonight is Mary Charlotte Demondy, who is her own kind of natural wonder. She has been the host of Santa Fe Radio Cafe, which was on KSFR for years and years, and now can be found as a podcast at the Santa Fe New Mexican site. The most popular show, as we all remember, in Santa Fe. Her mantle is just filled with awards, and we're very grateful to have you here. Before I pass it over to Mary Charlotte, I want to focus your attention down on the bar there, on my screen at least. There's a Q&A button, and we would love to have your feedback and your questions for Dr. Dag and for Allison. So please feel free to type them in, and Mary Charlotte will try to weave them into the conversation. Thank you all for being here, and I'm going to pass it on to Mary Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's just great to be here. I hope that all of you who are participants tonight have already seen the movie. If you haven't, it will be available at the same link that brought you to this in the first place. Fantastic movie. And so let us introduce our wonderful people here. Dr. Ann Innes Dag has been called, as you probably know, the Jane Goodall of giraffes, and her story, if you've seen the film, is one of great adventure and of discrimination against women, which we'll talk about a little bit, of incredible spirit, and most of all, of love for these magnificent animals. Welcome, Dr. Dag. And Allison Reed is here. She's the director of the film. She's a filmmaker, has many, many years of experience in film. And this is actually her first documentary. It was going to be a narrative movie, but it turned into a documentary. We're going to be talking about that. But I want to thank you for bringing this story into the world. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you very much, Mary Charlotte. It's great to be here. I'm just wondering if Anne can hear us all right. Can we?
Yes, I can. I didn't know.
Okay, good.
I was waiting for the pause.
Okay.
So Anne, you, as you talk about in the film, you fell in love with giraffes when you were a little girl and determined to devote your life to science and to the study of this animal. You went to college and studied zoology, then you went to Africa. But before that, when you were a girl, when you were a teenager, were you already studying animals? Were you going to the zoo to see the giraffes all the time? What was that early part of your life like?
Well, I loved animals, and I would spend a lot of time looking at squirrels and what they were doing, and we had a dog, and yeah, I really loved animals, and I couldn't see a giraffe though because there were no giraffe in Canada. And my mother came from Chicago, and she would take me down there sometimes, and I would see the giraffe, and that was what made me want to know more about them.
So, Allison, how did you find out about Anne and her story?
Well, actually, there was a radio documentary on CBC Radio that told Anne's story. So it grabbed me. I was intrigued by it. So I read her book, Pursuing Giraffe: A 1950s Adventure, which was, of course, the book that ended up being instrumental in her rediscovery later on, as you saw in the film. But I read that book, and I could immediately envision it, as you said, as a scripted film. With actors, you know, playing Anne and going through her whole story. So I met Anne, and she was kind enough to give me the rights to that book and to her life story, and was in the early stages of developing it when I found out she was going back to Africa for the first time in all those decades. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is historic and it needs to be recorded. So I asked Anne if I could tag along with her on that first trip. So she said yes, and then I tagged along with her for the next 5 years. So the story sort of unfolded and revealed itself to us as we went. But that's how the whole thing started.
Now, when you went with her to Africa, when you like tagged along, as you said, did you had you already seen the footage that she had shot there, and so you were ready to do the kind of like comparison between the present day and the 1950s footage?
I was aware, yes, I was aware that there was some 16mm footage, but we weren't aware of all of it. Actually, we discovered more in your attic, didn't we, Anne?
More in the south of Africa rather than Kenya.
Yeah, exactly. So that first trip that Anne took back in 2013 was actually to Kenya. So we weren't doing the mirroring shots, as I call them, in Kenya, because of course Anne's pioneering research was done in South Africa. But by fluke, a few years later, there was going to be a giraffe conference in near Kruger National Park, which was really a stone's throw from where Anne had done that pioneering research. So we thought, oh my gosh, this is an incredible opportunity to go back to fleur-de-lis. So at that stage, I did take screenshots of the 16mm footage and sent them to a fixer we had there, who went out and found those places where Anne was, and we got to revisit them, as you saw. So that was pretty amazing.
Let's play a little clip from the film. We've got a few clips that we're gonna set up. They're just a minute long, so we can then talk about them.
In Stockholm. Number 3, is the giraffe monogamous? Does a male giraffe look around at the lady giraffes, or does he settle down?
No, he's not monogamous.
He's not monogamous. This gets good. Oh.
Take your ballots and mark them, if you will, please, for number 1, number 2, or number 3.
Anne actually went to South Africa to begin her studies of giraffe before Jane Goodall got to Africa to study the chimpanzees. She wasn't only a pioneering scientist looking at animals in the wild, but she was fighting all kinds of odds as a woman.
It takes an explorer's heart to be willing to set off like that, to go and study animals in Africa in the 1950s as a single woman traveling the continent herself in her little rickety car.
This was a different world then. There wasn't the infrastructure, there were no mobile phones, there was nothing. She did the groundbreaking stuff. But ironically, has slipped under the radar and doesn't attract the attention that she deserves.
I voted for number 1.
Well, I voted for number 1.
Well, I voted for number 1 as well.
I voted for number 1. I think she looks like the scholarly type.
Let's find out at once which one of these ladies, in truth, is the giraffe expert. Will the real Anne Dag please stand up?
And of course, it was number 3, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, I found that YouTube. I found that episode of To Tell the Truth on YouTube. So anybody can watch it if they want to. It's really fun and interesting. But one of the things about that, I mean, that To Tell the Truth was in 1965. And did that make a difference? Like, did a lot of people see it? Did it help in any way to, with your work with giraffes, to have that national TV show?
No, not at all, actually. No, I don't think anyone ever really mentioned it again. And I guess it was shown in the States, because I know my husband and I went down, I think it was in New York, and we had a really good time, but my family members thought it was pretty good, but I didn't get any other appreciation at all, which is odd.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it wasn't very well known at that time, although it was a big feature for years.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was, I think it was in reruns when I was a little kid. I'm rearranging the giraffe on my shoulder here. So at the time you were studying giraffes in their natural habitat in Africa in the 1950s, was there any sense of a threat to wild animals as there is now?
I would say that nobody really paid any attention to them. There weren't many people coming from other countries. They were just around, and no one really was thinking of their possible extinction. And I guess there were huge numbers as well. But I would have been amazed if I'd thought they wouldn't be so healthy later, many years later, because they seem so exciting and interesting in Africa.
Well, what was you stayed at the Fleur-de-Lis Ranch. What was, and you go out and you spent time seeing these giraffes each day, and probably lots of other wildlife too. What was the land on which they lived? Was it public land or privately owned land?
It was privately owned. So this was a huge venture of a man who was making a lot of cattle on the fields, and just a huge venture. And he left all the wild animals just be among where they'd always been, which is really good. Only they were now fences. The giraffe, having such long legs, could cross over the fences, and but that didn't seem to bother any of the other animals or the workmen who were working on the ranch.
How do giraffes interact with other wildlife?
I think they were pretty bored and didn't pay them much attention. I think giraffes are so important and big that they don't have to worry about anything smaller.
So they don't get attacked by predators?
Well, they would be attacked by lions and leopards, but on this particular ranch, I don't think they were being attacked. I don't remember any. It was a big, being a ranch rather than just wild area.
Do you remember the first day that you went outside and saw your first giraffe in the wild?
Yes.
What was it like?
Oh, it was so exciting. I just couldn't believe it. And I had my little car, and the giraffe would look at me, and then they'd get bored and start eating on leaves. And I would write down what leaves what the reef looked like, and what they were eating, and how many of them were, and what they were doing. And it was, every day was the same thing, but they're always doing different things, and it was just wonderful. Exceeded all my expectations, really.
Was it hard to, because I mean, as a scientist, you're really not allowed to interact with them, and you don't want them to have human influence. Was it hard to do, to really leave them alone?
Oh, yeah. It was just awful when on a hot day, and I was in this tiny little car, and I would be sitting there in the sun for maybe 4 hours. You just thought, I'm just going to die of heat. But it was important not to let the giraffe sort of notice or pay attention to you, because otherwise they would change their behavior.
Did that ever happen?
Probably, but I tried not to make it happen. Sometimes, I remember once they didn't seem to be paying any attention, and I got out of the car and started to do energy with my legs and arms and waving them around just to make myself feel better. And then suddenly I looked up, and they were all standing there looking at me, and I was really embarrassed and got back into the car. I never did that again.
Allison, talk about making this film. I mean, you heard this radio broadcast, and then what did you do next? You approached Anne? Like, tell us about that process.
Yeah, so I approached Anne, and she was, as I said, kind enough to be on board with me making this film, and then kind enough to let me tag along with her. So, I mean, at the beginning, you know, it was quite a scramble to find you know, a small crew to go with us and to organize everything. But once we were there, it was fantastic. We followed Anne around, and I also got to interview, you know, the giraffe scientists that she was interacting with. You know, it was my first time in Africa, so you know, it was amazing to be in that pop-top vehicle and seeing, you know, giraffes on one side and zebras and guinea fowl and, you know, anything you can imagine. It was like a menagerie, ostriches. So as experiencing Africa for the first time, as well as shooting the documentary. So that was fantastic. But also, I mean, Anne really, not only has she led such a rich life, but she's preserved such a rich record of what happened, you know, not only in terms of the 16mm film that she shot in Fleur-de-Lis, and then of Mr. Matthew, of course, shot some of that film of Anne doing her work. So to have that kind of a record was extraordinary. And also to have all the letters that she wrote. I mean, she has all the correspondence between she and her husband, she and her mother, all the letters from Mr. Matthew, and they're beautifully poetic letters. It was so hard for me to choose which excerpts to use because they're just beautiful. I think we should almost bind all your letters, Anne, and publish them sometime, because they're, you know, they're an interesting read unto themselves. So yeah, as I said, there were some very interesting coincidences that happened along the way. Like, who knew that there would be that giraffe conference happening at Brookfield Zoo, the very zoo where, you know, Anne's mom took her so many years ago. So for Anne to revisit that exact zoo, and for us to talk to the giraffe scientists there, and for them to get to meet Anne, some of them hadn't met her before. It was pretty cool. And the other cool thing was having Anne's daughter Mary along for part of that ride. She went to South Africa with us, and you know, she was also, as you saw, at that conference at the Brookfield Zoo. So that was pretty special too.
Why don't we play a little clip? I mean, your year in South Africa, and when you were only 23 years old. I mean, it's such an amazing story of just courage and spirit and chutzpah, you know, that this young woman just kept on persevering until she found somebody who would take her, you know, who would let her stay. There's a little clip that speaks to that time and the time after. So let's go ahead and play that.
Dear Mommy, this morning I was out giraffing and saw 7 giraffes at once. They were all so close I could see their eyelashes. One of the giraffes snorted to see what I would do. Finally, the tension was too great, and they all cantered off. You can see how conversant I sound with giraffes.
Especially as this is my 3rd day here. So I'm pretending I know everything.
Well, it sounds like you did a huge amount of behavior observation. How did people react to you as a woman alone like that? Did that affect you at all?
Yeah, I never really thought about it, that me being a woman, it was strange. And they thought about it all the time, I think.
But you never let it stop you?
Oh, no. Well, because I was thinking I was a person.
I think that clip is so interesting because, I mean, here was the 1950s when everybody was, you know, basically women were supposed to be in the home and be the perfect housewife, and Marilyn Monroe was kind of a sort of symbol of that period. and you didn't even think of yourself as a woman, you thought of yourself as a person. How did you do that? Like, did your mother just raise you really well? I mean, how did you find that in yourself?
I guess my mother did, but I had 3 brothers and sisters, 1 sister and 2 brothers, and it's I guess that's the way we always behaved. So it's hard to say. I guess it's just what I'm like.
Yeah. This film is so much about sexism, and I mean, it's about giraffes and it's about you, but there's this very important theme, and that's why NOW, now New Mexico is here with us. I've been watching this TV show. I don't know how many of our participants or how many of you guys have been watching it. It's called Mrs. America. It's about Phyllis Schlafly, who was this woman, this sort of like grassroots organizer who was basically making a career of trying to tell the rest of us women that we shouldn't have careers. And I was, young when she was saying all that stuff. She encountered plenty of sexism herself, but sort of didn't cop to it. You encountered a lot of sexism in the sense that, I mean, it was hard for you to go to South Africa in the first place, but that you were able to do it. But then getting offered a teaching position and getting tenure, it wasn't just you. So many women at that point were discriminated against, who were, equal to or better than their male counterparts, but they still weren't getting work. And after you didn't get tenure and you appealed the decision, you fought it, and then at a certain point you kind of gave up. What did you do during those intervening years?
After I had tried 3 places, and often I had many more articles I'd written and books I'd written than the people that were telling me I was no good. So it was a horrible period. So I decided if they could do this to me, they could do it to any women. And so I thought for the next 20 years, I just fought for women and made observations about how the various people had been treated unfairly and tried to make as much of a fuss about it as possible. So then the universities really were glad I'd left them. But I guess it has worked, because I think women are getting much more, a lot of women are now banding together and saying we're just as good as men, and let's get on with it.
I wanted to ask you, Allison, I mean, you are from the next generation after Anne, more or less. Did you, in the film industry, encounter sexism, or do you think things were quite a bit better by the time you went into the industry?
Yeah, that's, I certainly never experienced anything like Anne did. My background in the film and television industry is, as before I became a filmmaker, I was a stunt performer and stunt coordinator. And I don't know if I'm just obtuse or what, but I wasn't aware of a lot of it. I mean, there were some more minor incidents that, were, nothing I couldn't handle, but nothing major. Like there was no big roadblock. Although, now that I think about it, now that you asked that question, I wanted to transition into directing for a long time. And, it took 10 years. Like I made my first feature-length film, I don't know, about 12 years ago. And I was trying to, transition into directing then, and it just wasn't happening. It just wasn't right. And then I saw the climate in the film and television industry change a few years ago. It really changed dramatically. I was starting to see a lot of female directors. So I knew that the situation was a bit different. So I put another push on, and then it worked. So it's definitely changing a lot now.
There's a great book about women in television called Stealing the Show. And if anybody's interested in that kind of thing, it's just basically about the sort of history of women in television from Mary Tyler Moore until I think the book came out about 5 years ago. One of our listeners, oh, there goes the giraffe. One of our listeners wrote and asked about the parallels between the discrimination experienced by women and the discrimination experienced by the Black South Africans that you met. And in South Africa, you were very friendly and very open to everybody you met, although you were sort of told, oh, don't talk to the Black South Africans, but you did anyway. What was that like? Did you feel that there was a parallel there?
Well, it was huge. The white people never spoke to the Black people enough to tell them what to do. I found it absolutely disgusting. So I made a point of always talking to the Black people, and I wasn't rude to the white people though, but yeah, it was, and it has been, I guess, that way until maybe recently. I hope it's stopping. It was just horrendous.
There's one of those letters that Anne wrote, is one that really struck me, and she was telling Ian about Mrs. Potts, and Mrs. Potts was Mr. Matthews' sister, and she was particularly racist and particularly bigoted, and Anne is describing a dinner conversation, and she's saying, like, I can't believe, you know, she's so bigoted, I can't believe her point of view, and I think I lost the argument because I was screaming so much, and I don't know what to do. I mean, it's just, you can just imagine young Anne there beside herself. But I think it is so ironic that Anne was, you know, fighting against discriminatory behavior, and she was, to a certain extent, able to, you know, she did end up making friends with Black people, and she had Anuka and Bella, those two kids, with her all the time, and so she was able to make some headway in Africa, and it was very ironic to me that she was not able to make such headway in Canada. You know, when she got back to North America, it was you're absolutely right in that parallel. She encountered a very similar but in some respects situation.
I mean, the tragedy of that, and it's the tragedy of all kinds of discrimination, is that it's not only that the person loses out on having the career that they are qualified for and passionate about, but it's that the world loses out on having somebody like Anne, you know, studying, and then eventually it would come to fighting the good fight for elephants. And I can only imagine or speculate about whether, you know, you might have, as a scientist and as an advocate for elephants, been able to do something in terms of habitat preservation and conservation if you'd been on the ground.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't even get a job in Canada when I had much better qualifications than the men that did get the job. So there was nothing I could do. And yeah. And at that time, we really didn't realize how badly things were going in Africa as well. I think that's mostly in the last, say, 20 years, maybe.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Mary Charlotte. You know, one of the most powerful moments for me in releasing this film is the University of Guelph, who Keith Ronald, the guy you saw who was in the film, who was the head of the promotion and tenure committee. So that university, when the film came out, started getting some correspondence because people were not happy to hear of what had gone on. So they were very brave, I thought, and invited the film to screen for the faculty and students at the University of Guelph. And at that time, they issued an official apology. They read her an apology, and they also announced the establishment of the Anne Innes-Dagg Scholarship for Summer Research. So every year, I think it's $8,000 will go to a female biology student for her summer research. But so that was fantastic. But one of the women in the audience stood up and said, I was a student here at Guelph in the 70s, and I feel so ripped off because I went to Africa and I wasn't able to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And if I had had Anne Dagg as my professor, I know that things would have been different for me. So you're right, there's so many levels that this has affected things. Number one, Anne didn't get the career she wanted and deserved. Number two, the planet is lacking all the research that she would have done in all those years, so we would know a lot more about giraffes. I mean, the dean at the University of Guelph said, you know, we lost out on having Ann Dack at our university as a full professor. And, you know, of course, all the students lost out too. And, you know, Anne's one person. And when you extrapolate the kind of effect that discrimination has had to all the other talented people that weren't able to pursue their dreams and their talents, it's just mind-blowing. And I wonder if the planet would be in the state it is now if people like Anne and all the others that were blocked from realizing their potential, you know, if they were allowed to realize it. So anyway.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you know, Jane Goodall is one person, and she has done so much because somehow she got the support at that time when it was unusual to do so. But, you know, had we had 100 or 500 women like Jane Goodall and Anne Innes Dagg and so on, I mean, the world could look very different, and we hope that it will, because now the, you know, PhD programs and universities are full of women and tenured women. So, you know, moving forward, if it's not too late to save some of these beautiful large mammals, and that is one of the questions that I was going to ask you. What is, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to what is the state of giraffes in the world right now. I wanted to go to some of the questions from our audience members. One person asked how the film has been received, and you talked about what happened at the university, but you know, this film must have been at festivals and so on. How are people responding to it? What's that interaction like?
It's been absolutely fabulous. You know, I knew that Anne's story spoke to me very, very strongly, and it's been so nice to see that it resonates on so many levels with, you know, with giraffe people, animal people, you know, women, men, older people, younger people, like they all seem to really connect with Anne's story. So it's been fantastic. Anne and I, and her daughter Mary, have been traveling around a lot with the film before this hit. I mean, we had our New York premiere in January, and then we went to Kenya for a few weeks, and then we were in LA. And you know, the press has been very kind to it. We got great reviews in, you know, New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post. So we've been very, very happy with the response to the film. And certainly when Anne is in the audience, you know, there's a big lineup to talk to her afterwards. You've got quite a few standing ovations, haven't you, Anne?
Yeah, always actually.
Except for that one at the old age home, do you remember?
Oh yeah. We were all so disappointed, and they were all over 82, I think. So, and it turned out they really couldn't get to their feet in time to make it. So that made us feel better, although we feel sorry that they couldn't move better.
One of our participants asked, were there any surprises about giraffe behavior either on your first African trip or when you returned many years later? And I think one of the things that's so interesting about the film is that, you know, you talk about the fact that in your second book, you realized some things that you hadn't seen about giraffes in your first. Could you talk about that a little bit?
So I think, Anne, I think the question was about the surprising behavior. So I think one of the things that changed that, you know, Fred in the film started talking about was, for instance, it used to be thought that giraffes didn't form close social bonds. So, you know, Anne was just studying one small group, but scientists subsequently have discovered that actually the female giraffes and their calves, right, Anne, do stay together for quite a long time.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing I noticed, which was unusual to me anyway, was that the males would be fighting among each other, and then one male might mount another male. So I thought, I've never heard of this before, of the same sex. And actually, I wrote a paper about this eventually, and it was incredibly common, but no one had really written about it. I guess they're too embarrassed. But I found that really interesting that that should go ahead and that nobody would make a note of it, that they had homosexual behavior.
Was that, go ahead.
Sorry, one of the other things that I found really fascinating, Anne's always told me that the gestation period of giraffes is about 15 months. And I always thought, it's bizarre that it's like about 15 months, but we were just at the Giraffe Center in Nairobi, and I learned there that giraffes actually have an ability to delay giving birth if there are conditions that are unfavorable. So if there's a drought or if there are a lot of predators around, they can actually delay giving birth. So that's why it's like about 15 months, I guess. So that's just another thing there are so many fascinating things about giraffes. I was talking to a cardiologist, Dr. Barbara Horowitz in Los Angeles this morning, and she's actually doing a study, or she's actually trying to mine the incredible characteristics of the giraffe cardiovascular system. You saw Anne in the film talking about how they control their blood pressure. And anyway, because their heart and their head are so far apart, they've adapted this super duper cardiovascular system. And she is trying to figure out how that can help, people that are human beings that are experiencing heart failure. So, I mean, we could go on and on about the fascinating giraffe things, couldn't we, Anne?
And I'm sure there are researchers thinking into this right now. But a lot of people will seem to be getting interested in giraffe, which is wonderful.
Yes.
So there's a lot of young and not so young giraffe researchers.
Oh, way more than there used to be. Yeah, probably scores and scores of them working right now in Africa in various. There are the various different subspecies in different areas and what's going on in each of them. It's so exciting now.
It is, isn't it, Anne? And one of the, do you want to tell them about Wild Nature Institute?
No, you go ahead.
So to your point, there are two scientists, Monica Bond and Derek Lee, who have an organization called the Wild Nature Institute, which is actually doing the largest study of giraffes in the world. They're following 4,000 giraffes that are over this vast 25,000 kilometer area. And they're doing incredible work in not only raising awareness in a creative and fun way about giraffes and giraffe conservation, but they're working with local people in a very meaningful way, and also doing tons in terms of educating. They have programs where they're going into schools. They've reached 60,000 Tanzanian students, and they have giraffe celebration days. They go in with storybooks and playing games. So they're really doing some excellent work. And actually, Anne, that's one of the organizations that Anne is throwing.
They really, the more money they can get, the more exciting things they seem to be doing, which is great.
Talk a little bit about the challenges to giraffes and their habitat.
They're the animal that can pull them down are lions, but I guess they've been doing that for forever.
That's one of Francois Deacon's specialty, is the habitat loss. And
what has he been?
Yeah. So, I mean, Anne was telling me that, giraffes spend some ridiculous amount of their time eating. They spend, like, I think, is it 80 or 90% of their time eating leaves. So they need a tremendous amount of, acacia trees around and other vegetation to support a giraffe. And as you can see from watching the film, that's being encroached upon so much. So that's one of the biggest challenges facing giraffes.
There's also the question of hunting, and some African animals are being decimated because of the Chinese medicine trade. Do giraffes play a role in anything like that?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Has that been true, Ali?
Yeah, it's funny. The gentleman from the Defenders of Wildlife was talking about CITES. So I want to tell you about that. So that's the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. And just back in August of last year, 6 African countries got together and asked that CITES add giraffes to Appendix 2, which is the appendix that deals with the illegal international trade of their parts. So, so 83% of the countries voted yes. So giraffes, so it was a big victory. Giraffes are now on that list. And what that means is that it'll be a little bit harder to, there'll be some regulations about their illegal trade. So Fred Berkowitz, who you saw in the film, was played a big role in getting that through. And it's ironic to me that not every giraffe conservation organization was for that. The biggest and richest giraffe conservation organization in the world actually was in favor of not putting giraffes on that list. So that's kind of bizarre. But what I wanted to say was that, yes, giraffe parts are being traded. I've heard it said that giraffe bone is the new ivory. So there are giraffe bone carvings. In the United States, I think you could get a stuffed giraffe head and neck for $6,000. Their tails, their skins get traded. So in answer to your question, yes, that is a big problem. And one of the leaders in fighting that is New York's Governor Cuomo. Just in December, he passed the first bill that, never mind trading illegal giraffe parts, he's just banned trading giraffe parts in New York State. So he did some groundbreaking work there. That guy's amazing. I love him. We were watching him up in Canada, and he's an incredible leader. So so yes, it's a problem, and we're, lots is being done to try and fight that.
Speaking of Governor Cuomo, do you have any sense of how the global pandemic is affecting giraffes in Africa?
No, I don't. I'm not sure at all.
And you want to tell the story about the, I guess that's not exactly answering your question. Do you want to tell the story about the locust we saw when we were in Kenya? Do you remember they haven't had locusts in that part of Kenya for 70 years? And when Ann and I were there a couple of months ago, there was just an invasion at Samburu National Reserve of all these locusts. And I don't know.
There must have been millions and millions and millions that we could see in all directions. They were amazing.
Yeah, but in answer to your question about the pandemic, so that reserve has been shut down. So the lodge that Ann and I were staying at, I've heard has been shut down. So tourists obviously aren't going. So that's going to affect the income for those lodges. So they depend very much on tourism to keep protecting the animals and keeping them safe. So it's affecting them in that way.
There's a couple of related questions from listeners. One of them asked how you feel about zoos, and another one asked what kinds of information can we learn from observing giraffes in captivity?
I think some people think we should shut zoos, but actually I would never have gone to Africa if I hadn't seen a giraffe in a zoo. So I think all the ones that have zoos now, we might as well just keep them because we don't want to send the animals back to Africa where they might die anyway. So what was the rest of the question?
Yeah, and that's a good point, Anne. And the other point to be made is that zoos are, not only are they a place that young people and everyone can connect with that kind of exotic megafauna that they would normally never get a chance to see. So maybe they would also be inspired to, study them and save them. but also zoos are big fundraisers for conservation organizations. So the alliance between zoos and giraffe conservation is an important one. So so those are two good reasons to keep zoos, and obviously they're, you know, through the accreditation through the AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, there are really good standards of giraffe care.
Probably best not, though, to have any more brought into zoo land, because zoos can produce their own animals.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty well cutting down. Pretty well no one's doing that nowadays, thank heavens.
Yeah, yeah.
The other part of the question was, is there anything that you can learn by observing giraffes in captivity, or is it just such an artificial situation that it doesn't really tell you anything? Or
no, they could learn a lot of things about blood pressure and things, but as you say, it doesn't really react with the environment, which is where they live. I'm not sure of all that many all that research has been done in zoos. I know what that has been done is interesting, but
should we play the last clip from the last of the 3 clips from the film?
When I was in Africa in the early days, 60 years ago, it never crossed my mind that there wouldn't be giraffe forever in Africa. It just was inconceivable. I thought I could study them all the rest of my life and there'd be still equal numbers.
April 4, 1974. Dear Annie, do you still have the film that you made of the fleur-de-lis giraffes? Sad to say, those that are left have to put up with an air polluted with automobile exhausts, the reek of hot asphalt from the blacktop highways that now cut through fleur-de-lis in all directions. How lucky we were to know it all before this development took place.
The situation now is appalling. Everyone is worried about the elephants, but no one has been worried about the giraffe at all, whose numbers are far less.
So another listener wrote to ask about this place where you were, the Fleur-de-Lis Ranch, what it was like then and how it's changed in all these intervening years.
it was really just a big house. Mr. Matthew had 3 daughters, but they were off in California with their mother. So it was very, very attractive. What was the less part?
Well, and the other thing is that, so Fleur-de-Lis used to be, as Anne's explained, a vast expanse of ranch of cattle and citrus farming. And, you know, I talked about that fixer that helped us find the locations. And she gave us a map of what used to be Fleur-de-Lis and what is Fleur-de-Lis right now. And Fleur-de-Lis right now is a bed and breakfast. So you can actually go and stay on a little part of Fleur-de-Lis. And Anne and I and Mary stayed there in a little rondavel huts while we were in South Africa. But there are no actual giraffes on Fleur-de-Lis proper anymore. When we were there, we did see a giraffe skull that's in the film, and we wondered if that was like the skull of Star or one of the giraffes that Anne had studied.
Oh, no, don't even say that. That would be too long.
I'm sure he's still alive, Anne. Don't worry. So that's changed a lot, but it's interesting what hasn't changed. I mean, clearly, Mr. Matthews' office, as you can see, with juxtaposing the 16mm footage with the present day footage is very similar to what it was before. So it is interesting to see what's changed.
There are you can go on trips, as we did, in a truck through where we were in part. So there are still giraffe there in the areas, but you had to go when you were told, and they were completely sort of like a huge zoo, but again, much better than a small zoo. So that's something.
Allison, what has happened since? I mean, whenever you make a documentary, you know, it ends in whatever time period you're in, but then things happen afterwards. Do you have any news or updates since the film was finished?
Yeah, well, I spoke about a couple of them earlier. I mean, the scholarships that University of Guelph set up in Anne's name, and also the apology that they gave her. But other universities have been coming forward. Anne's received several honorary doctorates. And just in December, it was announced that she is being appointed to the Order of Canada, so our highest civilian honor. So that's been wonderful, huh, Anne?
Can you talk, Allison, about future plans for this story? In other words, originally it was going to be a film, then it became a narrative scripted film with actors, then it became a documentary. What's next?
Well, I'm hunkered down, using this time to write. So because I've spent so much time with Anne, I've just uncovered so many layers of her story. And actually that was a big challenge in editing this film, is because there are so many interesting tangents you can go off on in Anne's life. But there are many, many things that I wasn't able to address in the documentary. Fascinating parts of her story. I can't go into it now, but danger she was in, characters she met, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm, with my producer, Paul Zimick, we're developing a scripted series, so a limited 8-part series about Anne's life, so we can delve into it even more.
So a limited 8-part series. So you'll have an actor playing the young Anne and somebody else, a number of actors over the course of this series. How far along is that? You're writing it, and then you'll have to find somebody to make it. Is that the process?
Yeah, I'm in the early stages right now. But you're right. We'll have actors. I'll tell the story in a similar way. There'll be a present day story going on with the current day Anne, the 80-something-year-old Anne, and of course we'll tell the full story of her as a 23-year-old, getting on that ship and going to South Africa, and of course the whole tenure thing she encountered when she got home in the 70s after she had her PhD. So yes.
One of our participants wrote and said that you, Anne, had mentioned at a Canadian movie showing how much of an impact your mother had been, and you were thinking about writing a book about your mother. Is that happening? Is that? So
yes, it's going along quite well, and we're hoping that should be out in the early next year. At the Wilfrid Laurier University Press is thinking about doing it, and they seem quite pleased. And my daughter Mary is going to work with me to see it happen, and so I think it would be exciting.
Tell us one or two things about your mother.
Well, I think she was pretty brave to say, when I said I wanted to go to Africa and I was 23, and she said, well, are you sure? Because it was, no one did that in those days. And but she said, well, I want you to do that because you've always wanted to see the giraffe, and so you must go. And I did go, but I think many mothers might have not been so lenient. And I've always been grateful that she allowed me to go, because it made my life, really.
One of our listeners was very excited about the fact that you, Allison, had seen the footage and then went back and shot footage in the same place. And Jason has some photos of this return to Kenya. Do you want to show them, Jason? Well, actually, there was a return to South Africa, but there's also photographs of Kenya and of that trip. Do you, I guess our mics are on, so do you want to talk about some of these?
Sure, that last one with the kids was us at the Eco School in South Africa. So that was really cool. Anne went to speak to the kids there, which was great. Oh, there's that classic office, you know, Mr. Matthews' office that that he filmed her coming out of, and that I did a mirroring shot. Yeah.
It was such a hot little car. It was just desperately hot, as you saw in the movie, that I had to go and then get in again because it made the giraffe interested in me.
And I love that you named it Camelo after Camelopardalis, the original giraffe. Yeah, that's just typical Anne. Just if she's watching a giraffe, she's got that blissful look on her face.
I did want to ask you, either or both of you, I mean, we hear, of course, about poachers poaching wild animals in Africa, all over the continent, but there's also so many African people who are engaged in conservation of wildlife. What have you seen of that, of the second part, people really engaging in conservation? And the education that young people are getting about their wildlife.
Yeah, well, I mean, one example, I think there'll be a picture of Jacob here. So maybe in a few, these seem to be older pictures, but with Anne and I, as I was saying earlier, we're recently back in Kenya, and Jacob Ladira, you know, he's a Samburu guy who's lived in that area his whole life, and he's one example of a naturalist, a conservationist who's working all the time. And Monica and Derek from the Wild Nature Institute worked very closely. In fact, they're facilitating, I'm pretty sure it's a Tanzanian guy to get his master's degree. So, there's also an advocate for wildlife conservation that they work with, that's a singer-songwriter, you know, as well. So there's lots of work going on with local people. In fact, that's one of the things you value in conservation organizations, huh, Anne?
Yeah, because we want to get it's not our problem to go and worry about the animals. So it's really the people that live there have to deal with it. So but we can do all we can to help, and if people will give money, we can give them to the groups that help them get the people that help the giraffe.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, if anyone is interested in helping those organizations, I mean, you can Google Wild Nature Institute. I think it's .org, and also our website, TheWomanWhoLovedGiraffes.com. There's a lot of information on there, including a Take Action page. And if you click on the Take Action page, it'll take you to lots of info about Wild Nature Institute.
So people who maybe are listening now are encouraged to go to those sites and to contribute within their means. What is the solution? I mean, let's say you get all the money in the world. What do you do with it that would really help giraffes and giraffe habitat?
Do you want to, Ali, do you want to answer that one?
If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do? I know it's a really good question. I think a complicated one. I don't think there's one single answer. You know, it's going to be very interesting to see, you know, if we go back to our old ways as a planet. I mean, everything's is clearly interconnected now. So as Anne's told me many times, like it's not just saving giraffes, because we're all connected. I mean, the giraffes are not going to thrive unless the local people are thriving, and the same with the other animals that live in that area. So I just think, you know, we've got to all start living more like Anne does. I mean, Anne is a vegetarian. She occasionally will have a piece of fish, but she leaves a very, very small footprint on the planet and lives her life that way. And I think if we all, you know, it seems like such a massive problem, and it seems like one little person is insignificant and whatever one person does isn't going to affect things. But if we can't think like that, we all have to do our best to make a difference. Look at what Greta Thunberg did, you know? And yeah, so we all have to do our part in protecting our planet and our species.
So we've been here for about an hour and we'll probably wrap up in a moment, but another question just came in from one of our listeners, and the question is, have Anne and Jane Goodall ever met and discussed their efforts and goals with one another? Is there a way that they could work together to help these animals?
Yes, we did meet her, and we had a lovely half hour talking to her. She's got a magnificent set of people that have been working with her for 20 years, so I think they probably don't need us to help them. And I think we'll do better if we could. We're thinking now of what we can do to help giraffe in Africa with money that people are giving us. So we both appreciated each other and had some tales to tell. But she has a much bigger group than we do, and she's had it for so long that I think we'll just probably go our own way and decide what we want to do to help. She has done a magnificent job.
Yeah, she's got that Roots and Shoots program, so which of course starts looking at the bigger picture, like not only chimpanzees, obviously they're her first love as giraffes are Anne's first love, but we did talk to the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, who kindly arranged the meeting between Anne and Jane, and they're both on the same page that it's.
I was first.
What's that?
I was first.
That's right, you were first, Anne. Anne was there, as you know, 4 years before Jane.
So, any other things you want to say? Oh, I was going to ask, has this film been helpful in terms of fundraising?
Yes, it has. It has been. We've been very, when I first approached Anne about making this film about her, she said, why don't we make a film about giraffes instead? Because I'm really concerned about giraffes and I think we should make a film about giraffes, as Anne would say. And I was able to convince her that, sometimes conservation films are really hard to watch, and a friendly way into the conservation story is going on this journey with this adventurous, pioneering woman. I hope it's an uplifting story. So yes, people have been very generous in their responses. So one of the primary reasons Anne wanted to make this was to help giraffes, and that's starting to happen, and we're going to continue those efforts long past the release of this film. Well, the film will be around for a long time, I hope, but Anne and her daughter Mary and my executive producer Paul Zimick are working on we're working with organizations that speak to Anne's values, and right now she's very, very much aligned with the way Wild Nature Institute is thinking, and we're hoping that to continue going down the path with them in some way. Anne?
Yeah, which would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you both, and Jason and the CCA, for being part of this. Thank you, Allison, for making this wonderful film. I can't wait to see the next thing that you do, which will bring yet another set of visions about Anne's life and about giraffes to the rest of us who tend to sit indoors and watch screens. And Dr. Anne Innes-Dagg, thank you so much for being here and for everything that you've done. And I can only hope that despite the discrimination that you encountered, that this this most recent period of your life has really been fulfilling and maybe a bit redeeming as well.
Yes, it has. And I'm incredibly grateful. I'm really lucky.
Jason Silverman, anything else that you want to say before we shut down?
I just want to echo the thanks. I feel honored to be in both of your presences. Allison, I know this is a great work of commitment, and doesn't surprise me that it took 5 years to shoot it. So thank you for all the work you did, and Dr. Dag, I think we'll all be a little better for having spent the 90 minutes of time in your presence in the movie and this last hour here. So thank you for taking the time and for all you've done.
Oh, it's been wonderful.
And Mary Charlotte, do you want to, or Allison, do you want to set up? I know we've got a little gift for everyone on the way out.
Sure. So, by the way, thank you both as well. Jason, Mary Charlotte, everyone, the National Organization of Women and the Defenders of Wildlife. No, we really appreciate the chance to talk. But so we wanted to leave you with a music video. It's called, I hope I get this right. It's called Okaha Twiga, which means save giraffes in Swahili. And it's made, it was produced by Wild Nature Institute, and it was performed by a Tanzanian singer-songwriter. And right now it's playing on buses, on radio stations, and television all over Tanzania. So it's reached lots of people, and I think it's making a difference. And I think it shows the hopeful, joyous spirit, and it'll be uplifting in these times. So thank you very much, everyone.
Twiga ni urithi wetu, ni alama ya taifa letu, ndiye mnyama mrefu hutia watalii nchini kwetu. Twiga wanapungua, uwajibika, tuulinde urithi wetu. Okoa twiga wanapungua, uwajibika, tuulinde urithi wetu.
Tanzania tunajivunia, sifa zake zinawavutia.
Watalii wengi toka mbali huja kwetu kuwashuhudia. Endapo wataisha, sifa hizi zitatupotea. Basi wajibika, mimi na wewe, tusipoteze sifa hii. Tanzania, basi wajibika, mimi na wewe, tusipoteze sifa hii. Tanzania, okoa twiga wanapungua, uwajibika, tuulinde urithi wetu. Okoa twiga wanapungua, uwajibika, tuulinde urithi wetu.
Wanawindwa kwa ajili ya kitoweo, hivyo hupungua idadi yao. Wanawindwa kwa ajili ya kitoweo, hivyo hupungua idadi yao. Tuongeze jitihada, kuwalinda nyama hawa.
Jambo la aibu, jukumu letu pamoja kuelimisha vizazi vijavyo. Jambo la aibu, jukumu letu pamoja kuelimisha vizazi vijavyo. Kwa twiga